Thank you, everyone, for joining me today. It means a lot for you to really take the time out of your busy calendars, especially with technical glitches going on and everything. But it's great that you're here to learn, about neurodivergence, especially autism in this case. This is a topic that is very near and dear to my heart because, well, I'm autistic, and I wanted to kind of share what it's like working in an office setting, as well as how we can better support employees by being island preservers and bridge builders. And if you're wondering what the heck that means, we'll get there. So let's get this rig rolling. So first, what are we going to be talking about today? First, I'll give you a little context into myself, why I'm the one presenting on this. Then we'll tackle some basics like what autism is, its symptoms, what the spectrum looks like, and some commonly used vocabulary. Then we'll talk primarily about what autism looks like in the workplace, both with some current stats, my personal experiences, as well as the perspective of some employees who are caretakers to autistic children, because that's a very important perspective to consider as well. Next, we'll talk a bit about accommodation, and then finally what a bridge builder or island preserver is. Just a little hint for you, they are my favorite types of coworkers to work with. Last, there'll be some time set aside for Q&A. We're still going to try and make some good time for that, even if we go over a little bit. That'll just be dependent on how things go. And so if you have questions throughout the presentation, please put them in the Slido link you saw at the beginning and upvote the questions you most want to see answered. We'll do our best to get through as many as we can. But before we start, I want to kind of give a disclaimer. I am not an expert on autism, nor am I representative of the entire autistic spectrum. I am just one autistic voice who's absorbed a lot of information and articles on the subject in order to break down and summarize everything for you. This topic is also really, really vast, but I only have so much time. So we're mostly going to be focusing on autism in the workplace more than some of the larger topics you'll see out there. With that out of the way, let's get started for real. So who's the schmuck that you're hearing from? Well, I'm 28 years old. Originally from Montana, where I went to college at MSU, go Bobcats. I got my degree in business marketing and management, and then moved to Texas with my now wife, and I've been here ever since. While I was in college, I was also in the Army National Guard for 4 years, where I served as a communication specialist. If it had batteries or plugged into a wall, it was my job to install, maintain, troubleshoot. There's a lot of different systems I had to kind of learn and figure out. I won't go through all my career history. If you really are interested in it, you can look it up on LinkedIn. But I came to Elation in October of last year to join Matt Turner's partner marketing team. I work on a lot of the content and programs for our partners and alliances teams. I also head up the Neurodivergent ERG here at Elation alongside Katrina Keep and Antonio Fernandez. Now you can see here on this slide, I was only first diagnosed with combined ADHD a year ago, and it's only really been a few months since I was formally diagnosed with autism. This kind of thing being diagnosed later in life, it's more and more common nowadays, as especially over the last 2 decades, our understanding of what neurodivergence is and how it presents has changed, and there are a lot more resources available to people to look into the conditions. But there are also a lot of people who do self-diagnose. I was more than sure I had these conditions before I got tested. I still did the testing. A lot of people don't do that because testing can be expensive and time consuming. For me, I was kind of, the reason I really pursued it is for a reason I think this crowd can really appreciate. I just wanted to see some data behind the condition and stuff like that and how it presented for me. But before that, again, I've always had the condition. I was born with it. For very early on in my life, I always felt there was something different about me. But there was a long time in my life where I also resisted that and even got angry when people told me I was neurodivergent. It was slowly seeing more people in media talk about neurodivergence that kind of softened my thoughts on it. And I didn't really pursue it for myself until it started to really affect my career. At the job that I worked before Elation, I was struggling to meet deadlines, keep up with the workload that my peers were handling, and both my boss and I there were very frustrated by it. She sat me down one day and she was like, I know you're passionate about your job. I know that you know how to do your job. So where's the disconnect? I didn't really have an answer at the time, so I had to do a lot of soul searching. I came back with ADHD and suddenly things really started clicking into place because I was finally ready to both hear and accept it. I got treatment, I had accommodations made at my work, and it just changed everything. It really helped me start reaching a lot of the potential that, a lot of the potential I knew I had. Then when I started Elation, I could still feel there was a piece missing. ADHD didn't really cover all the symptoms, and it was actually some good representation on TV of an autistic character that kind of finally made me put two and two together. I was really relieved, I'd say was the feeling I had when I finally figured it out. Everything really started to make sense. It put a lot of my past into context. And I will say it didn't immediately solve every problem I had, but putting a new context on everything has helped me be more accepting of myself and understand what I need from my career and workplace to be successful and bring the best of myself. So with that, I'll finally stop talking about me and we can actually talk about what we came to talk about. First off, let's talk a little bit about what autism is for those of you who might not be familiar. Don't worry, I'm not going to be reading every single bullet point on here verbatim. I'm just going to give you a brief rundown of kind of the history of the terminology. So the term autism was first coined in 1908 as a form of schizophrenia, where the subject would retreat from society to indulge in childish fantasy. It's rooted in the Greek, it's rooted in the name itself, which is the Greek autos, or self, where the condition of self is prioritized over reality. After that, in 1925, there is a Jewish Soviet scientist named Grunya Sukareva, who published a list of autistic traits that are still in use today. However, she doesn't get a lot of credit and is ignored a lot due to kind of, in 1925, she was ignored for being Jewish, Soviet, and, well, a woman. It was a rough time. But in the 1940s, then we have scientists like Connor, who identified the symptom of autism in infants. And then we also have Hans Asperger, who noted people who exhibited signs of autism, but with less severe impediments. He named the condition after himself, but Asperger is not really a term in use as much anymore for a few reasons. One of which was Hans Asperger's potential ties to the Nazis at the time. So, yikes. In the 1950s, autism is first added to the DSM-2. If you don't know, the DSM, or Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, contains all of the mental conditions that are recognized by the American Psychiatric Association. So it's all the stuff that you can get formally diagnosed with. So it's listed in that version as a subset of schizophrenia still, but then when the DSM-3 comes out in 1980, it's now listed as its own condition. 1994, the idea of the spectrum comes with the DSM-4. Autism, Asperger's, and related conditions kind of get grouped together as part of this spectrum. But then finally, 2013, we get to the DSM-5, where there's just autism, no Asperger's, nothing else. It's all the same, with one exception that's called social communication disorder. But more important, the point here is that we still have one spectrum, and interestingly enough, Grenia's symptoms from 1925 are still in use today, despite her not really getting a lot of credit for it. But what does autism actually look like? With so many previous conditions kind of grouped together, most lists of symptoms you see are going to be really long, and not every autistic person is going to experience all the same symptoms to the same degree. The DSM-5 groups these into two main categories: social communication and interaction skills, and restricted or repetitive behaviors or interests. In the first category, we see things like lack of eye contact, low empathy, emotional understanding, difficulties with most of the social things people take for granted, like knowing how to recognize sarcasm, when it is your time to speak, or what might be considered rude or impolite to say. This also falls along with trouble picking up nonverbal cues. Autistic people might also speak flatly or have abnormal pronunciation, and in extreme cases also be nonverbal or not able to really communicate verbally at all. As you can imagine, many autistic people can also exhibit symptoms such as social anxiety and will avoid interaction and possibly even retreat into their own heads and worlds. The second category is a bit more personal. Most autistic people will have one or two very specific interests that dominate their brain. For example, Dan Aykroyd is listed his special interests as ghosts and law enforcement. Kind of go figure a little bit considering his work. There's a very wide spectrum of things that a person might have. Other symptoms in this category have to do with the repetition of words, routines, habits, and harsh reactions when those things are interrupted. Stimming is another very common symptom where you see repeated movements or gestures, especially when excited. There's also the potential for poor physical coordination or clumsiness. Autistic people can also have challenges related to their sensory input. This is one that is pretty commonly known, that your senses can essentially be overly or underly sensitive, leading you to be either sensory avoidant to things like loud noises, bright lights, or some people are even sensory seeking, where they're looking for things like intense flavors, smells, they touch whatever they can. There's a wide variety of reactions and stuff like that. So why do these symptoms develop? We still don't really know. There's no real one definitive answer, from everything from genetics, brain chemistry, diet during early childhood, and prenatal reasons. There's so many different potential causes. We just don't understand neurology well enough at the point. And that's part of the reason why the spectrum is just so broad and big. But that was a lot of information and symptoms. But like I said before, it's really a spectrum. It can be best summarized by this quote you see here from Dr. Stephen Shore. He's a special education professor from Adelphi University. He also is autistic. And he says, if you've met one person with autism, you've met one person with autism. And that's very true. No two autistic people experience the condition exactly the same. As you can see below, people long thought of the spectrum as a very linear thing where you were either high functioning or low functioning. But these terms aren't really accurate, and they kind of do more harm than good. The idea of the spectrum as a wheel with wedges for the various groups of symptoms is much more accurate. Every autistic person's wheel is going to look different, with highs, lows, averages all over the place. You might see one autistic person who has very high sensory needs, stims a lot, and has very intense special interests, but they might be highly empathetic or have great social skills. It's also going to present differently than another autistic person who may be nonverbal or has a speech impediment, social anxiety, but they have a wide variety of interests and very average levels of sensory processing. Both of these people are still autistic and on a spectrum, but which one's high functioning? What really determines that? And that's where we get the 3 levels of autism. Each level refers to the amount of support that a person needs from their community to be part of society. Level 1 may have some difficulties in certain situations or struggle with independence in certain areas, but generally they need some support to function in an holistic setting to just reach the best of their abilities. Level 2 is where we find autistic people who struggle interacting beyond what they are engaged in, and they may be even more married to routines and behaviors that they struggle to change. These people require more substantial accommodations than to participate with others. Level 3 requires the highest amount of support. They may be unable to speak or communicate like a neurotypical person, or change from their routines without very significant stress or difficulty. The point here is that by defining the levels by the amount of support they need, society and companies are better able to create environments where we can really see the advantages that come with autism. So autism also has a very high list of conditions that can occur comorbidly. And they occur typically at very much higher rates than they do in holistic people. Funny enough, I got this list from CHOP, Children's Hospital of Philadelphia. Great to see them appearing at Elation again. So as you can see here, the list is fairly extensive, and many autistic people can develop multiple of these. Autism and ADHD together are often called AUDHD or AUDHD. ADHD is especially frustrating because while some of the symptoms overlap and can feed one another, there are also times they can create a lot of paradoxical symptoms, like what you can see here over on these visuals here. Anxiety and depression also often co-occur. worsened by things like social isolation or difficulties. Eating conditions are often caused by sensory sensitivities or repetitive behaviors, eating only certain foods and eating them over and over again. Synesthesia is a very interesting one. If you're not familiar, it's when two of your senses essentially get their information intertwined, and it causes some very interesting overlaps. People might be able to do things like hear colors, taste images or words, feel sound, stuff like that. So kind of after all that, what does my autistic experience kind of look like? Again, my experience is not going to be the same as others. That's why the phrase "you don't seem autistic" is pretty unhelpful. Whatever preconception you have of it may look completely different for another person. If someone says they are autistic, then just be supportive, ask them how it manifests. These results are from my own evaluation I did back in January. I rated it as mostly level 1, but there are times when my repetitive habits or behaviors can require more than basic levels of support. I also have combined ADHD, which can create some conflicting and frustrating symptoms. For example, I love to create routine and process, but I really do struggle to maintain it. Synesthesia is a very interesting experience for me. My sense of touch and hearing kind of interact in a way that I can kind of feel sound on the back of my neck and the back of my skull. It makes listening to music that I like extra fun, but when I'm in more, harsh sensory environments, it can sometimes feel like someone's beating on the back of my head, and stuff like that. I've also struggled with diet a lot across my life, especially eating the same foods over and over again and having a lot of sensitivity to how food feels in my mouth. My special interest is probably of no surprise to any of you who've ever actually had a meeting with me. It's storytelling. I drink up movies, music, TV shows, books, fiction, nonfiction, all of that. And I also I retain it. One example I like to give is that as a kid, my parents took me hiking and I didn't really want to go on that hike. So to annoy them, I quoted Monty Python and the Holy Grail from front to back, doing all the voices the whole time as we're going up and down this mountain. But at the end, they said they weren't even annoyed. They were just kind of impressed that I did it. So if you ever really need someone for trivia night, I'm your guy. I'm the guy you want on your team. The testing revealed a lot of advantages and disadvantages for me as well. You can see them listed here. Like I said, I'm a sponge for information, especially if it relates to my interests. I also have a very strong creative personality, especially in the areas of like problem solving and utilizing the information I absorb. I have a strong sense of process. I think about a lot of things like three-dimensionally, breaking them apart, reassembling them in orders that might be more efficient or better for me to understand. But the trade-off really comes from my sensory and social areas. I don't often recognize how people are feeling or what emotions they're displaying naturally. I can still do it, but it's something I have to extrapolate logically with effort rather than just relying on my instincts, like a lot of people do. Social interactions are also hard because I can panic if I don't have context for what is going on, and I struggle to understand when it's my turn to talk or when it's someone else's turn. So I often find myself like scripting conversations in my head before I go through them or as I'm going through them. I've always had these. I never knew why they occurred, and so I would just assign them to something that made sense. But it's only now that I can kind of see the forest for the trees and really start to work on capitalizing these strengths and managing the challenges. So we have a clear idea of what autism is now, kind of how it presents in at least one individual. But I just want to hit a few vocabulary terms that you've probably heard before. Masking is not one is one you'll hear not just from autistic people, but from everyone. It means to hide your true self in order to better fit in. Everyone does it to a certain degree, but autistic and other neurodivergent people do this especially often because of the way our brains are wired. And it's a large source of stress and burnout for us because, again, it doesn't come as naturally to us to socially adapt as others. Another term you'll hear a lot is sensory overload. This is a very common thing for a lot of neurodivergent and even neurotypical people. It's a staple condition very much with autism, where all that extra sensory processing power you have and more sensitive senses, well, the world can just kind of get harsh sometimes as your brain just shoves more and more information into your brain. And eventually your brain kind of responds with what a fight, flight, or freeze instinct, which brings us to shutdowns and meltdowns. Meltdowns are often more external and kind of explosive. They can be short or long. It's just all that pent up energy that you have just exploding and just being released. A shutdown can follow a meltdown, or it can just be a response to the overload itself. You kind of just retreat inside your head, cut off as much stimuli and try to recover. Now, there's lots of ways to manage these. I personally like to use noise canceling headphones, go somewhere cold and dark. When I worked in the restaurant industry, the walk-in freezer, that was just top tier. That was perfect for, those kind of feelings. But everyone has preferences on what is relaxing to them. So we've talked a lot about that. So let's talk about actually, how someone with autism navigates the job market and the workplace. So autism in the US and the UK has the lowest employment rate of any disability. In the UK, it's something like 22%, and it's 14% in the US, compared to 80% of non-disabled people and 47% of non-autistic disabled people. This is 22%. Of this 22% in the UK, only 16% are employed full-time. And this is not a they don't want to work kind of situation. Of the part-time employed autistic population, 77% of them want to work more. I got ahead of myself. 40% of those who are part-time employed want to work more. But of the unemployed autistic population, 77% of them want to work. And 53% want some kind of support to find a job, but only 10% are getting it. So what's the issue here? Most of the commonly reported barriers start before even entering the workplace. Recruiting practices are not inclusive or dismissive of autistic individuals. There are also gaps in skills and accommodations, and often hostile environments with very little sympathy for people with different needs. These barriers can really prevent autistic people from entering the workforce, succeeding in it, and holding down a job. But why should we care about, having more neurodiverse people in our workforce? Well, because like I said, autism has some unique strengths to really bring to the table. For autism, there is a higher than average participation in fields like STEM. Computer science, as you can see here, attracts 16% participation from autistic students compared to the 7% average of the general population. Autistic people are often very excellent in skills like observation, detail management, analytical approaches, and socially they're often honest with a strong sense of integrity. The reason behind that is when social cues are really a struggle for you, it's kind of hard to be good at lying, or even see the point in it. My wife, for example, can always tell when I'm lying about anything, whether or not, like, for example, whether or not I'm enjoying a show she picked out, and it has landed me in hot water a couple of times. And I'm sorry I couldn't appreciate the plot of Pretty Little Liars 1. Anyway, this last strength I want to mention is loyalty. On average, autistic people switch jobs less, especially if we are supported in that environment. It's something like 3 to 4 times more likely to stay in environments that are supportive. Now, to, again, put things in perspective for me, for one autistic person, it's affected me differently at different stages. At school, I performed very well. This was because my special interests aligned often to material, and I was just able to absorb and reuse information. When I went to college, I also learned several ways to kind of game my symptoms into working for me. I got around issues with like eye contact by kind of finding fixed points behind people's heads and using that as kind of an anchor for my eyes. The other thing I would commonly do is what I called social eagle. So you might have heard of the term social butterfly, where you kind of flit from conversation to conversation. So what I would do is I would crash into conversations, trying to disrupt them with a joke or an antic that would make people laugh and would hopefully endear me, while also forcing the original speaker to recontextualize the conversation for me because they lost their train of thought. It had mixed success, and I don't like doing it because it's rude. It's rude to interrupt people's conversations like that. But you can also see, like, that's the amount of thought and scripting that kind of went into my social interaction at that time. Having to script heavily, mask heavily just to talk to people and not being able to rely on my gut I would also struggle in any class that had a teaching style or material that didn't work for me. And often I had to kind of brute force my way through that. I performed well enough academically that and I've also masked well enough that my teachers and my parents kind of never really pushed that hard for me to get evaluated. So I kind of just missed the bus on a lot of the potential services and accommodations that might have made me more successful. But I will say that if I had been diagnosed earlier, I would have been barred from serving in the military. Autistic people are not allowed to serve. Now, serving is something that I am really proud to have done, but boy, would I never do it again. It's not a great environment for me. I had very little control over the sensory parts of my environment. I still struggled socially to pick up on nuances that were part of daily life. And there were physical challenges. I've mentioned my struggles with weight and diet already, but there's another common symptom of autism that's, poor physical coordination. And that's kind of a thing you need a lot of in the military. For me, I tend to stand awkwardly and I have some difficulty with running. While I did manage to mostly pass my physical tests, I was far from the best. Now, there was a place I really did succeed in the military, and it was in any place mental. My communications unit was a fraction the size of normal units, which meant that even as a lower enlisted, I had a lot of autonomy to be creative and become a subject matter expert in the systems I was using. So I was planning communication strategies for training operations that would involve hundreds of soldiers. And because I had this process and strategy focused mindset that allowed me to kind of break apart problems that people who were my senior had spent years learning how to do. And it was just a lot easier for me to kind of pick that stuff up. I'd never go back to the military, but I'm glad I did it. So when we get to my career, I put my interest in storytelling to work in marketing, where I can both put forward the drive to be creative, as well as pick up a lot of new skills quickly and build new processes and ideas. To this day, I still have to push hard to keep up with my peers, and putting on a mask often as just a way to get through numerous meetings, and struggling in those meetings to always know when it's my turn to speak or when I'm supposed to do something without it being explicitly said. So there are ups and downs, just like there are for anyone. But I also want to reiterate that, struggling in the workplace with autism doesn't just affect autistic individuals. It also affects the caretakers of autistic children. The perspective here comes from a few different caretakers at Elation who anonymously gave me some comments. For certain parents, they struggle with balancing the needs of work, customer calls, and the additional duties involved with the needs of being available for their kids, at school, with things like therapy and appointments that are necessary to make sure their kids are getting the help they need to be successful. One challenge that is cited is the link between going above and beyond and promotion. With the greater duties at home to provide a healthy and stable environment, parents can struggle to meet these high expectations, even when they're no less dedicated to the success of Elation. But this, of course, leads to the greater question. How do we support autism in the workplace? Now, there are lots of ways we can go about this, but really communication is key. Asking your autistic employees, coworkers, and reports, what do you need to be successful? As I said, all of them are different and are going to have different needs. This is also where, I'm sorry, I lost my train of thought. This also goes for all neurodiverse employees. The first step is being willing to ask and say, how can I do better? How can Elation do better? For autistic people, there are numerous ways, but there are a few guidelines to follow. Don't assume all autistic people have the same needs. Listen like you're wrong and ask them how they want to be referred to. Throughout this presentation, I've referred to myself and others as autistic people rather than people with autism or people on the spectrum. That's because I cannot separate myself from autism. It's part of me. But there are many people who feel differently. Maybe they prefer Asperger's to level 1 autism, and that's fine. It's up to them, and no one is expecting you, the person asking, to know off the bat. So just ask. The next tip is to be open to taking action from the conversation to meet our needs. For example, working from home was a godsend for me. I get control of the sensory conditions of my environment. I get to organize it in a way that works well for me. And all of that is great. So having a conversation, though, is also a two-way street. Neurodivergent people need to come forward and disclose their needs, because we can't expect managers and coworkers to be mind readers. Open minds are kind of just needed all around. And flexibility in work is also key. I don't really work traditionally regular hours. I make sure I'm available throughout the entire working day, and I respond to all requests, but I tend to kind of work in bursts. Almost like 2-hour periods where I'll do about 3 to 4 hours usually worth of work. And then I typically take a break to, go work out or just decompress, and then come back and I'll do it again. And I'll just repeat that until I finish for the day. I typically just do 8 hours of work, but it's in my own way. I've already talked about working from home, but for some people that come into the office, they may need things like a sensory space to decompress, flexibility in things like lighting, sound, smells. With those with social anxieties might prefer not to have their cameras on during meetings, or communicate through writing, or reading the minutes of a meeting after the fact. The possibilities are wide, and most of them are actually not all that hard to manage. There's an entire conversation to be had around inclusive recruiting practices as well, but if I get on that box, we won't have time for questions, and I want to make sure there's time for that. Lastly, I want to bring it back to the caretakers. Flexibility is key here too, making sure there are freedom to cover calls, customers, projects if needs arise. There are many programs for children that require family participation on a regular basis. Oftentimes these programs are, very in high demand, and they have limited availability and long wait lists. So it is key for the parents to take advantage of those things when they need to, and for workplaces to accommodate those family needs in special cases. Also, as I mentioned earlier, we can ensure our promotion and compensation practices are equitable to people regardless of whether or not they have the freedom to put in extra hours or not. So finally, we kind of come to the question of what is an island preserver and what is a bridge builder. And for that, I am going to hop over to my iPad. All right, so what is a bridge preserver, and what is or a bridge builder and an island preserver? Well, the best way I can kind of relate it is that I start every day on an island. This island essentially represents my ability for the day to deal with sensory stimuli, to deal with social interaction, to basically do all the things that I need to do to take care of myself. And over the course of the day, little things will chip away at this island. Having a meeting, having, an intense sensory situation, making sure I eat, making sure I shower, little things will cause this island to just slowly chip away over the course of the day. So what happens if the island just completely falls apart? Well, that's when we often see things like that's typically a sensory overload. And again, that can be a meltdown or a shutdown. I'm going to apologize ahead of time for my handwriting. It's terrible. I'm sorry, please deal with me. And sometimes that can mean I'm just done for an hour. I'm done for half a day. I could be done for the whole day. It's so situational and dependent on just how things are going and what was the stimuli that finally just kind of broke the dam. So, what am I doing, during the day while I'm on this island that's kind of falling apart? Well, I'm building a bridge. And this bridge is all the things that have to get done in a day. This is work, this is projects, this is errands, this is making sure that things get done. Making sure that I'm doing my job, that I'm making sure that, partner marketing is successful. So what happens if, that island falls apart? Well, the bridge might not get built, and it might not get built, and it might not get finished, and, things might fall through the cracks. Now, what happens when I finish building the bridge? Well, that's when I get to the next day and I get to the next island, and I start the whole process over again. But here's the thing about building these islands. Sometimes the islands are bigger from day to day. Sometimes I have a good day, or I just wake up nice and I have more energy to deal with everything. And that's really great. And sometimes, when I build that bridge, it's nice and short. Maybe it's an easy day. Maybe it's just a work day where I didn't have a lot of social interaction. I got to do a lot less. But then there are also days where sometimes I just start at a deficit. I start on an island that's smaller and my tolerances are just lower. And sometimes I have to build a bridge that's much bigger. There's more going on. There's more that has to be done. And that's the thing, is it's not consistent really from day to day how much energy I'm going to have or how big my bridge is going to be or how hard it's going to be to build that bridge. There are lots of things I can do to make things better, to slow down the degradation, to slow down the island. Typically what I will do is, I'll make a category here. Typically what I will do is, that's when I take sensory breaks. I'll make sure I eat and stuff like that, eat something that, is relaxing or helps me feel better. Or this is when I will engage with special interests. Anything that kind of just recharges me and makes sure that that isn't detracting from that island. As for the bridge building, what can I do there to make sure that bridge gets built? I can ask questions to make sure I understand what I'm doing. I can take notes. As you can see with this, I use this notepad to take very extensive notes anytime that I'm on. So that way I'm never missing context for why things have to be done. And I can also record, what are my action items? What am I responsible for? So that way I can stay on task and make sure I'm building that bridge and not losing energy to floundering. I can develop better processes. Again, I can use that advantage of understanding process to build ways to build projects in a way that helps me make sure that they're getting done in a way that's effective and works really well. So these are all things I can do, but what is an island preserver and what is a bridge builder? So you might be already able to extrapolate based on what we've already talked about. Island preservers are the people who help me keep that island going, who help preserve that social and sensory energy. They can be a person I can unmask around, who's comfortable with letting me unmask. They can be a person, get back your pen. They can be a person that I can engage with on special interest. They can be a person who encourages me to take breaks. They can be a person who just is generally positive to be around, and that can look very different from every person. Every person kind of has a different kind of person that recharges. For example, some people, they enjoy someone they can gossip with or someone that they can talk about their life with. Other people like things that they can talk about, things that aren't related to work, and stuff like that. Which brings us to, what is the bridge builder? The bridge builder is the person who helps that bridge get built faster. They are the person who clarifies. They're the person who is a source of feedback to make sure that I'm on task and that I'm understanding what needs to be done. They are a person who empowers process. They remove obstacles. They can be the person who covers for meetings if I can't make them, or if I'm not all there in the meeting. They can be the person who is covering that and making sure that things are getting done. Essentially, this is the bridge builder. I don't know why I drew a circle, but the bridge builder is the person who is making work easier, who is making it easier to get to that next day's island. The island preserver is the person who is making sure that island lasts throughout the day and make sure that I can reach the end at a time that works for making sure that that island is preserved. And I never really reach sensory burnout and stuff like that. I am very lucky. I have both of these people on my team. I have people that I can go to unmask to and engage with on the things I like. I have people that I can rely on to make work easier and enable me to reach my top potential. And it all just kind of makes things, it makes me much more effective. It allows me to really bring what makes me good at my job and what my autistic traits allow me to do that's a bit different. They allow me to move it forward, and it allows me to empower them as well, because if I'm reaching my full potential, I can work better with them as well. And everything just kind of works together. Around. There we go. So now I really kind of want to hear from you on your questions. Make sure you put them in the Slido if you haven't already. Vote for the ones you like me to answer first. I know we have about 10 minutes until the top of the hour. If we have a lot of questions, I might take a little extra time, but let's just start with those 10 minutes and see where we go. So Katrina, have you been monitoring the Slido?
I absolutely have. We don't have any questions just yet that I'm seeing coming in. So please take a moment, everybody. If anyone's like me, they're probably in stunned silence. I've got chills right now, Daniel. Thank you so much for sharing this. What you might not have seen in the chat is just so much gratitude for sharing all of this today. So again, any questions? Also, if you want to come off mute, if you'd prefer that, please do.
Sure. So there is an entire there's a very big charity on LinkedIn that I very much like to follow. It's called Neurodiversity in Business. They have an entire resource center dedicated to this. The head of that, Dan Smith, he is autistic. He also has a son who's nonverbal autistic. Their whole mission statement is to create. The founder wants to create a world in which his son can be successful. Very, very similar to what you just said. So they just opened up an entire resource center that has articles on various different neurodivergences as well as support groups. There's also the Autistic Self-Advocacy Network, or ASON. They also have a lot of resources in terms of like social support groups and events, as well as like resources to kind of help autistic people. As far as building building skills and trades and finding what works for him, a lot of it's experimentation. A lot of it is figuring out, once I figured out what my special interest was, it was so much easier to decide what I wanted to do for a career. Because originally I went into college and I was just like, I'm going to open up a sports bar. And after I finished doing 25 years in the military, which, as you can probably guess, that would be kind of hell for someone like me, knowing what I know about myself now. But what really happened was I just had one really good marketing class, the marketing class I had to take as part of my management degree. And I discovered, oh, marketing is like storytelling. Marketing is like that special interest I have, and I can utilize it and stuff like that. And I can utilize what I love, what I really care about doing, in a way that translates to a career. And I think that's definitely harder for some people with certain special interests, but there are plenty of people who, what it really comes down to is finding where's that niche of that special interest, your special interest, your learning style, and a career. That often is very key.
Okay, we have two questions that have come through in the Slido, and I did send a link in the chat for that Neurodiversity in Business LinkedIn. So we can follow up with the slides and the recording and links like that in the Neurodivergent Elation Slack channel. So get in there if you're not already in there. So Daniel, a couple of questions. First one, how can team members help in stressful situations which need urgent attention, such as customer escalations?
A lot of times that comes down to just break it down simple. Break it down as simple as you can to what is the problem, what is the desired solution. Or even just laying, sometimes like I love whiteboard sessions personally, where you kind of just lay out all the pieces of the problem. And a lot of autistic people, again, we think very, very three-dimensionally through problems, and we can kind of just start to pick the pieces together and put them together. So a lot of times it's something that we mull over. Like for example, like I said, when I take those breaks for sensory stuff, I'm not stopping thinking about work. Like typically, like especially if I have like a problem in the back of my head, I'm just like, man, I really need to think of a way that we can, put out more partner webinars or something like that. I noodle on it. I noodle on it constantly while I'm at the gym or in the shower or anything like that, even when I'm taking those breaks. And a lot of times take advantage of that kind of nonstop processing power, is one way. Give them the space and freedom to look at the problem and come up with a solution. Don't, obviously, like, definitely say like, this is important and needs to be done by this point. Give firm, clean details. That's very key often. It's just like, because again, like, if someone says like, man, this is really important, and I'm like, yeah, it is important. We need this done right now. Oh, okay.
Right.
Yeah.
So clarity is super important.
Yeah.
Well, we've got time probably for one more question. So how can event organizers and team members help when there are long meetings with a lot of content or information throughout perhaps like an all-day event? Are there any tips for that?
So there are a couple. So breaks are great. Just chances to just kind of tune out and shut off, even for 5 to 10 minutes and stuff like that. Make sure the sessions are recorded is another great. If it's virtual, make sure it's recorded, because then they can go back and watch it if they need to duck out early or they need to just kind of switch off for a bit. As for all day events, again, like creating a space where they can go and be alone or sensory deprived is great. For example, for me, I go to the bathroom. A lot of times I just go to like, I'm just like, I have to go to the bathroom, but in reality, I just kind of just stand. I'll either stand there or sit in the stall or something and just kind of enjoy the silence. Also things like noise canceling headphones, sensory toys that you can kind of have in your hands are really great. Creating ways to accommodate those social needs. And again, this is going to vary very widely. So what I'll typically do when I've gone to conferences and stuff like that is I'll stick to the edges, or I'll stick just with people that I know, or I'll try and be task oriented about it. Give myself something to do that gives me something to focus on, that gives me something to kind of just tune out the noise and stuff like that. I've also discovered, again, soundproof headphones that I can control the amount of noise that gets in. I can very much recommend the latest Apple AirPods. They have great features for transparency and noise canceling, that can kind of allow me to control my sensory experience while still being able to enjoy the things with other people. It's really going to come down to what's that person's sensory thing. The things that you can do is enforcing breaks, recording when possible, creating kind of like maybe creating check-in points. It's just like, okay, people, we've been talking for an hour or 20 minutes. Let's take a quick moment to rehash where we're at and what our current action items are. That way, again, you're providing that clarity and context.
Thank you so much. I think there is so many ideas in here for everyone, right? Like there are so many takeaways, no matter where you're coming from, what line of work you're in. I think that's a wrap for today. We're right on the hour, but fantastic. Again, it's just incredible feedback coming in the chat, Daniel. So thank you. And we'll be sharing the recording as soon as we get it. So appreciate you all taking the time to join us today.
Thank you, everybody.